Sorry for all the reschedules.
All good. I totally get it.
I'm just like, it's something to do with your house. Because besides you and Jaime, there's only one other time we've had this problem, but we've had it like 5 times in your house. So I'm thinking it's haunted.
It's haunted.
That's what I'm going with. Yep.
Yeah,
it's
I
not
think
me.
it's the ghost that Baxter stares at night that makes Jaime, super scared about going to sleep by himself.
Oh, that's not getting cut. Oh, there's going to be a post-credit episode on this one. Anyway.
From the great halls of their house, there are assembled 3 who hope to one day be the world's greatest driving heroes. Created from the cosmic legends of the universe comes our team captain, the Vision Bill Fisher. Their soon-to-be Wonder Woman, Vicky Fisher. Our Captain Marvel and head flight trainee, Jennifer Scripchuk. And our Batman, the master of tools, gadgets, and all things mechanical. Our mild-mannered soon-to-be billionaire, Alan Danvers. Their mission? To fight injustice, share what is right and wrong, to get you out of your house and come out racing with them, and serve all mankind. They are the Garage Heroes in Training Team.
Welcome to the Garage Heroes in Training Podcast. I'm going to be the only host for this episode because everybody else is getting ready for Christmas. But to make up for me being here, I have a guest for you. Okay, everybody play the home game. She is a race car driver. She recently graduated from HPDEs and attended her first Lemons race with a former guest. No. We'll be doing time trials next year. NASA. I think it's Southern California. Is that the right NASA division?
Yes, that is correct.
Oh, okay, very well. Who knew? She might be an instructor. She hasn't decided yet. Is she silly enough to follow in her fiance's path? I hope not. We think she's smarter than that. She is Jaime's other half, who loves American muscle and over-engineered German cars. Nope, not yet. All right. Race FF podcast queen. She's been on there a couple times. Come on. Anyone? That's right. You got it. I heard somebody in the background. Carolyn Young, welcome to the podcast, Carolyn.
You are the first person to pronounce my last name correctly from the get-go.
Wow. I didn't even ask. I thought it was kind of easy. Oh, that's okay. I can't get the Jaime's name right because it's a Northeast thing. We'll get it straight. You should have heard Mental on the Everyone Racers podcast mangle it like 4 or 5 times. It was awesome. Oh my goodness. It was hilarious. Anyway, so I stink at intros just in case somebody didn't get the full complete picture of you. Could you kind of give a brief introduction to yourself for the listeners who might not know you?
Yeah. So my name is Carolyn Yin. I am a childhood Hot Wheels collector turned elder millennial aspiring race car driver. Started out, I guess, like being drawn to Tonka trucks as a kid, and then it just evolved and evolved and evolved, which if you are a first generation child of an immigrant family, especially the firstborn girl, it's just not a good thing.
Well, yeah, there's that.
I am engaged to the amazing and ever so polite Jaime Garcia. He is the much sweeter, much more polite half for all of my spiciness.
He's got bad taste in brake pads, but great taste in female.
Oh my goodness, the brake pads, the Levins brake pads.
But they last a really long time. I'm like, but they don't stop the car, Jaime. That's the point.
They slow down the car to like 80%, and then that's about it. That's all they got.
Yeah.
I am the lovely mom to Baxter, the loaf dog, half corgi, half golden retriever extraordinaire. He's our official track pup.
Oh, nice.
As far as professional life goes, I am a digital data nerd. Technical title is senior digital strategist for an online marketing company, mainly doing marketing for lawyers. So for any listeners out there who are lawyers, feel free to hit me.
We have a couple.
Um, as far as racing life goes, I am predominantly rolling with the NASA crew with Jaime, specifically the Southern California region. So cheers and hat tip to all of my SoCal NASA peeps there, starting with HPD 1, recently graduated HPD 4, going into TT, and then hanging out there for a couple years as a tentative plan. And then eventually co-driving with Jaime in H4 or possibly H2, depending on kind of like how the NASA changes shake out over the next couple of years.
Right. Yep. So very cool, very cool. So we worked our way up from HPDEs. We're now fully racing ready. We've done our first Lemons race. How did your first Lemons race go? We got Jaime's opinion, but now we want to know what really happened out there.
The first Lemons race was a lot. So up until this point, I've been predominantly driving more in an education environment.
Mhm.
So in terms of building up speed, building track awareness, communicating with other drivers. So there's a lot of track etiquette that goes into in terms of like, hey, this is, the way things work and how to stay safe and communicating with other drivers, all that fun stuff. So Jaime explained Lemons to me as like, hey, like, imagine like an HPD 1-2 group with a couple fast, like 3-4 guys. I'm like, okay, I can work with that.
Yeah. With a lot more of them than you're used to in an HPDE, though.
Yes. So I'm used to running with groups. I think the most cars I've run with at any given time was 45 cars.
Can't say that anymore.
So going up to, I think it was like 148 or 149 total entries that weekend was a little overwhelming just in terms of the number and the volume of cars on the track. Learning how to drive off the racing line, like completely off the racing line, lap after lap, that was fun. But overall, like, it was one of those things I walked into it going like, I'm not quite sure what to expect. I was a little stressed out because of kind of like that what if factor in the unknowns where I'm like, I don't know how to mentally prepare for this in terms of like, how am I supposed to kind of like, kind of get ready for this?
You can't. You just have to do it.
And I think it was the first 4 or 5 laps after I kind of like got, high level acquainted with the track and everything else. I'm like, okay, let's go.
That's awesome.
It was fun.
So expectations going in versus what you saw after. What do you think? Expectations
going in, my biggest concern was the different, like I want to say the different types of drivers, driving styles, things like that. I'm used to racing with, the same, I want to say like 20 to 30-ish people. So you get an idea of everyone's driving style, where their cars are at, where the strong and weak points are around the track, things like that. So you have a sense of pattern. Here, I'm just like, okay, like that's just completely out the door. I can't keep inventory of 149 other cars.
You'd be surprised. You'll get there.
It was definitely the being passed from all sides where I'm just like, okay, this is going to be the biggest thing that I'm going to have to just like mentally get over. Because you just commit and you go. If there's room on the track for you and your mirrors to squeeze on through, people are going to take it. Whereas I'm used to like, okay, you present yourself, you let the car in front of you know that you're ready to pass. All right, they're aware of you. You did like the eye contact in the rear view mirrors, like that kind of thing, and then you get to it. Now it's just like, all right, the gloves are off, just go. Pass as safely as you can. Within reason.
Yep.
So that was fun in terms of testing my own like spatial awareness and kind of like keeping track of things. I got to pass, I want to say about at least a dozen cars. So we weren't the total slowest car on the track as far as mechanical capabilities go. But everyone was super cognizant. Everyone was very polite. Everyone is very predictable in terms of kind of like, which lines they were going to take. Like once you get an inventory of like the faster cars that are consistently faster than you, then you're like, okay, cool. Like I know typically where they're going to move and you just go ahead and prepare for it in terms of like, if they're a turn or two behind.
So driver level, you were kind of expecting an HPDE 1-2 crowd with some HPDE 4 guys and girls. How
Kind of like a mixed bag. So when I was reading through the requirements of entering an event, the whole like you need to have a valid state driver's license, and it was a little bit of like a cautionary flag, like a yellow flag in my mind, so to speak. I'm just like, oh my goodness, like there are going to be some people who are going to be using this as like their first track event, and then they're going to be more seasoned drivers. Maybe, they've been doing this for several years, or they're like me, where it's like, you're trying something different within the grassroots driving arena.
Sure.
So that's where I'm like, okay, like the more experienced guys are just gonna go. They know the routine, they know the whole song and dance. I'm not worried about those guys. It's more of just like, okay, people like, I want to say like similar-ish experience to me, or the ones where I'm just like, oh my goodness, like if this is the first time on the track, like I don't want to do anything to spook them, or like can I, stay predictable and all those things. So that's
was
where
it
it's like
better or
okay.
worse than you expected?
It was better than I expected. I was thinking like, oh my goodness, this is going to be like bumper cars.
No bumper.
But once we got to the drivers meeting, it's like, hey, we're all here to have fun, race clean and everything else. I'm like, oh, okay. Oh my goodness. So all the kind of like worst case scenario thoughts, I'm just like, all right, like that was just like, I didn't even need to bother entertaining those. Like, it's not a big deal.
It's a self-policing group. So it kind of works out in the end. So there's this Race FF podcast. I don't know if you've ever heard about it, but apparently in the host's mind, there's only front engine, front wheel drive cars. Do you still have this issue, or have you realized that there are cars that perhaps have different types of engine position and or drive wheels?
Yes. So that's where anecdotally, so my daily driver is a 2017 Mazda Miata, the ND1 specifically. What
they made front wheel drive Miatas? What?
And for a hot minute over the summer, I'm just like, maybe I'll trade it in for a Honda Fit, like something a little bit more practical, something with a back seat that, like we can easily carry a little bit more groceries around in. And I test drove the Fit and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is like Jaime Silver Civic. It's like our EG, but just like it drives slightly differently. And I'm just like, I can't, I need variety in my life. So as far as front wheel drive goes, I totally hear Jaime and Rice FF Pod in terms of, it's a great starting platform. And usually the cost of entry is a little bit lower.
Yeah, usually.
In terms of purchasing those cars, like, used or off the lot, things like that. In terms of driving dynamics, front wheel drive is great just because it's like, if you make a mistake, generally speaking, you can slam on the gas and the rear end, kind of like straightens itself out and you can get yourself out of most situations.
Right.
The thing that I appreciate about rear wheel drive, and in my case, front engine rear wheel drive, is that it teaches you a little bit more finesse. You can't just use the gas pedal to, get yourself out of a situation.
Yeah.
You have to be much more aware about what the car is doing in terms of the balance and, the tires and like how the weight's being handled, things like that. So that's where I like rear wheel drive. It adds a little bit of variety. I test drove a Porsche Cayman. It was a 2018, the Cayman S with a 6-speed last fall, because I was thinking about possibly trading the Miata for something a little bit beefier. That was a lot of fun. I just didn't want to deal with Porsche maintenance, and I'm just like, well, maybe a little bit later when I have a little bit more disposable income. Yeah. But prior to that, I had a Subaru WRX. It was a 2014 hatchback. So learning all-wheel drive, even at a very high level, was really good. In terms of the car tends to push just naturally because of the drivetrain.
Yep.
And then there are certain qualities where it's like, oh, it feels kind of like rear wheel drive in certain corner entries and certain types of corners.
Right. And
then other times you're like, okay, it's understeering, like a typical kind of like out of the box front wheel drive car. So how do I drive around that? But it's good to have variety instead of like, even if you commit to specifically one platform, front engine, front wheel drive, it's still nice to have that exposure to other things, even if it's just on the day-to-day, not like, oh my goodness, I'm going to commit to also racing this.
Exactly. All right. So we're going to surprise Jaime. You're here. I'm here. You guys are coming out next year and racing with us. What car are we going to put you in? What car do you want to drive? We have lots to choose from. HPDE land. we have an NB Turbo Miata, we have an ND Miata, and we have E46 BMW. Or if we do a race, we can have a Honda Fit, like a Sunday Cup car. We could have a Civic 1993. We could have a spec Miata-ish, or we could have the stalwart of our team, the 2003 Chevy S10 truck.
So the HPDE bunch, I would definitely drive the ND just because it's my familiarity.
Okay. All right. Very well.
And I know most of that car like the back of my hand in terms of like
Uh-huh.
how it behaves when it's stock.
Okay.
In terms of like,
You get to choose.
I want to say the S10 just because it's like,
Okay. Very
my
well.
inner child is like, let's do it. Like,
All right.
have this chance.
Very well. It is quite fun. All right. So that's it, Jaime. That's it. You're stuck. That's decision's been made. If you come to an HPDE, we're bringing the ND Miata. If you come to a race, we're going with El Jefe, the trophy truck. All right. Very well. That's awesome. That's fantastic. No front wheel drives. That's going to be fantastic. Anyway, quite happy. Okay. So you graduated recently from your HPDE. You've done your first wheel to wheel. You're going for your time trials. Where do you think you want to go in your racing journey?
My inner child still wants to do Formula One, but I'm too old for that. So that's
Yeah.
shelved indefinitely.
I'm like 3 Formula One drivers right now.
So I've reached the age cap and I guess the weight cap. I'm overweight as far as Formula One standards go.
Yeah.
Honestly, I would like to stay in the club racing scene where it's like, I can still maintain my day job, but still have enough time to do something fun. I would love to go to nationals with Jaime someday in terms
that'd be
of
fun.
team driving in Honda Challenge. I think that'd be a lot of fun. There is the slight possibility I might be able to cut it this year in TT6 just based on participation alone because that group is so small.
I showed up enough. You got to let me in. I understand.
So it'll be fun to go, just kind of see, I guess, like I
just
did
to
it,
go,
but,
right?
Yeah, but I may or may not be entirely competitive because it's also at Laguna Seca for this year with NASA.
Oh, that's gonna be crazy crowded.
So looking at that track, I'm like, that back section, the EG and I have no chance.
We did it. It was not terrible. We had a good time. Any goals or series or types of racing you want to try that haven't hit the done list?
I want to try for the World Cup or World Challenge. I think it was probably World Challenge. That was when I watched it a lot. I've lost track of the naming. I think probably dropped as the title sponsor. Now it's something else. I wanted to race in the TC class, so pretty much like Toyota Yaris's and EGs and like that kind of thing. So that equivalent, since that's what I'm familiar with and have the most exposure to.
Right.
But we'll see. It's more about committing the time to hone in my craft at that point.
Sure.
Rather than like a cash flow thing, if that makes sense. It's like, okay, like I have to commit to this at a greater level than going out once or twice a month to local track events. Okay.
Vicky would shoot me, even though she's down for the count today. She will shoot me if I do not ask her favorite question. She has a favorite question, and this is it. She wants to know, up until this point in your racing career, what do you think your racing philosophy is?
Check your ego at the gate, basically.
It's a good plan. I don't think many people follow it, but it's a good plan. Unfortunately, people don't follow that.
Racing is one of those things where, based on the people that I've met and the cars and drivers that I've seen through NASA, through other like smaller track organizations, things like that, is if you drive with an ego, you're more than likely going to go off, or God forbid something worse happens. I've seen the whole gamut of people being upset at themselves. They're like, oh my goodness, like I have, an E90 M3. How come I got passed by, the girl in the Mini Cooper?
Mhm.
like that kind of thing. So it's
Yeah.
the thing is, it's maintain your humility and focusing on, growing the technical strengths of driving in terms of like hone in on those details, and then your racecraft will naturally progress with it.
Mhm.
Essentially, don't rush the process of learning.
Now that can get very expensive. Very. Okay. So thinking about getting people into the sport is kind of why we started this. It was basically a demonstration of, hey, if we can do it, you can do it. There's no reason. So, what was some of the things that were keeping you from getting started your first time going to the track?
So this is where I have to put Jaime on a little bit of a pedestal here, because he was kind of like my gateway into learning about track organizations. So
Cool.
prior to that, I was one of those that like, drove the mountain roads, drove the canyons. I drove fairly aggressively, but with like no technique.
Yeah.
And
You
no
thought you were good though,
understanding.
right?
Yeah, I thought I was super cool until like I went to Buttonwillow for the first time.
Yeah.
But it was just lack of knowledge in terms of like I didn't know that organizations like that existed, whether it's, again, like the smaller weekend crowds or like, national things like NASA or SCCA, things like that.
Mhm.
So it's just a not knowing part for me. Once I started dating Jaime, we actually met and bonded over cars. That was like one of our earlier conversations.
Wow.
And it was like, I see that, you like to drive. Like, do you want to go on track? I'm like, yes, I want to go on track. I just don't know how.
Yeah.
And he took me out to my first NASA event where he was driving. I was just spectating, and I basically followed him around in terms of like the classroom, going to the track, meeting the instructors, kind of like getting an idea of the flow and everything.
Mhm.
And I'm like, okay, this is cool. I like it. There's an organizational structure. Like, it's not just driving around the track and kind of figuring it out on your own, but you have an instructor to, guide you through these things. I'm like, all right, let's give it a try.
Right. So it wasn't the car, it was the knowing that it existed or it was possible.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay. And is there anything that you can see that would or should keep somebody from trying this?
It depends on the personality type, I want to say, of the person. I can speak for a couple of my own guy friends in this case. I will use them as examples without naming names.
Okay, let's call the first one Jaime. No, I'm just kidding.
It's for most people, there's a fear associated with it. It's like, oh my goodness, I'm taking my everyday car onto the track. What if I wreck? What if something happens? It's kind of like the normal, like,
Mhm.
what if fear-based questions. I want to say that's a pretty common one.
Right.
The other is the financial side. So depending on, the organization, if you run, like a Friday event versus like, a full weekend, if you have an instructor or if you're kind of winging it, there's all those little things that go into the variability of the pricing,
Mhm.
along with like, well, I need gas, I need to pay for my food, I might need to stay at a local motel. And so you kind of get overwhelmed with like, oh my goodness, like this was going to only cost me 200 and now it's going to cost me, like 400 or 500. So
Right.
there's that part where it can get a little overwhelming. The other part too, and this is where my guy friends come into play, is the fear of realizing that you're slow and you're not as good as you think you are.
Yeah.
I've offered to pay for the entry fees and the hotel fees for one of my friends who drives recklessly on the freeway, to put it politely.
Well, that's not good.
He's got a rap sheet with the police in terms of more severe tickets for moving violations. And he thinks he's the best driver ever. And I'm like, hey, like I'll even get you a rental car with, the walk away from it insurance if like, things get really bad.
Mhm.
And just come to the track with me and, we'll get you an instructor, we'll get you set up, and then I'll drive with you, like in the same group so you don't feel like you're alone.
Right.
But he doesn't want to do it because it's that, that factor of just like, oh my goodness, like I'm fast on the freeway, going straight in traffic weaving, but I'm going to be slow on a racetrack where, there's turns.
Yeah. Sounds like we need an intervention.
Yes. I need an intervention for like 3 or 4 of my friends.
Well, at least you're hanging out with the right people, so that's good.
Oh, goodness.
Okay, so still relatively new in your racing career, but you've done tons of HPDEs. You've done a race. You're going to do one with us. Who knows what else? You've got a couple things going on next year, but we'll let you slide. So we have a traditional set of questions. It's the good, the bad, the ugly.
All right.
The good is things that you did that you think somebody else should do, or things that you found out that would be good for them to do. Bad would be things that you did that might not have been the best choice, or things that you've learned since then that definitely don't do. You're talking to somebody new going to the track. And then the ugly one is just too much fun not to ask. So ugly is usually leads to story time. So something that just kind of went left instead of right, or went totally off the rails, or it's just entertaining now that it's done.
Oh boy.
And the more of these that have Jaime as a subject, the better. But
Oh my god. All right. As far as, do I have to go in that order? Or can I skip
nah,
a little bit?
you can do anything you want. It's your podcast. I'm just here.
So as far as good things go,
Sure.
I want to say always ask questions. Never feel like you're being intrusive. Never feel like you're a burden to someone.
Or it's a dumb question. Yeah.
There's no such thing as dumb questions, especially in the context of learning how to safely, move around a track. Yep. And, building your confidence in terms of, again, technical skill, but also gradually building your speed.
Yep.
Never be afraid to ask for someone, for a ride along, or to like watch your, your GoPro video feedback, like any of that. Everyone always has something helpful to add. It's just filtering through some of the information might be a little overwhelming. But everyone at the end of the day wants to help. They want to see you improve. And it's a big thing in terms of like, we want to see, you go through a turn faster, cook out a faster lap time, but also get home safely. So all those things go into play. I was perpetually afraid of asking questions for my first, I want to say like 2 or 3 events in HPD 1 with NASA. Just because it's like, oh my goodness, they're going to judge me. Like I'm already 1, female, 2, Asian. So throw in all the stereotypes associated with that. And the fear of asking something silly or something where they might roll their eyes, like that kind of thing, like just set it aside.
Yeah. Well, somebody else in the class usually has the same question. They're just too scared to ask. So
exactly.
Don't feel bad.
Oh my goodness. The ugly.
It sounds like you have one. Just say it.
I have lots of them, unfortunately. As far as stories go.
We've got all the recording tape that we need in this podcast, so you can just have as many. If you want to just have ugly for the rest of the podcast, we'll have you back on. It's not a problem. They're too much fun not to do.
So there was one instance. This was when I had my WRX, and I was an HPD 3 at the time. And the track was Buttonwillow. We were doing 13 clockwise. So classic configuration, the early middle part of summer. And we're out on the track. And one of the big things in an HPD environment is, if there's someone that's faster than you, no matter what they're driving, you stay on your line and you point them by. Going like, hey, I see you, like passing on the left, passing on the right, or if we're going down, the front straight or a back straight, whatever, you point them by offline. So it's that person's responsibility to safely pass, get around you, and get back on the driving line, not so much the racing line. So I had just done some fairly hefty suspension modifications to my WRX, and I was still kind of getting acquainted with it in terms of the changes to the car. So rather than cooking out the fastest lap I possibly could out of my system, it was like, all right, well, what is this car doing? What has changed and what is it telling me? And with that, there were 2 Miatas behind me that were significantly faster, like by miles. The cars were just better dialed in. The drivers were much more experienced than I was. So, all the factors in terms of, they're going to pass me at some point.
Right.
So I think they were behind me it was the little bitty straight before sunset. They weren't quite comfortable passing because it's kind of a smaller straight. And for them to build with speed, even though I'm completely off the gas and or braking, it was a little bit iffy.
Mhm.
So as soon as we got on the front straight, I stayed on my line. I pointed the Miatas by and they went. And behind the Miatas was another guy in a Fox body Mustang. And he'd been camping out there for a while. He had been behind me, I want to say, for about 3/4, almost a full lap.
Mhm.
So he had been behind me. The two Miatas got between him and I. And then going down the front straight, I pointed them by. I lifted off the gas because, a Miata has like 98 horsepower on a good day.
Yeah. Downhill.
Cold air. And I had a turbocharged WRX. I hadn't pro tuned it at that point. It was still the factory tune.
Mm-hmm.
Just with suspension cleanup. And I had stayed off the gas and was actually braking early into the braking zone for the next turn, which was Sunrise.
Mm-hmm.
It's a perfect 90-degree turn. You have a clear view of the exit, like a classic right turn or classic left turn. Sorry.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, hey, you can still pass me. I see you. Like, you're cool.
Yeah.
And I guess he wasn't comfortable passing. We're getting pretty close to the actual, where you have to start your turn in. I'm like, okay, that's fine. So we're going around and there's another little bitty size straight before Cotton Corners. And he's behind me. He's fairly close. I know he's faster than me in the corners just because, again, I'm not quite fully reacquainted with my car and its changes. Mm-hmm. So I point him by, doesn't take it. And I'm like, oh my goodness. Like, I don't want to be in this guy's way. So we get through the back section of the track, which is fairly technical. There's a lot of stuff going on. So passing for an HPDE 3-4 group, especially if you're like a newer 3 driver, can be a little scary in terms of just like, oh my goodness, there's so much going on.
Right.
And then we get into Riverside. So it's basically a sweeping open right-hander in that configuration. Mm-hmm. It's a high-speed, slow right-hand turn, essentially. And I'm like, hey, I see you. I'm scooting over to the outside where all the marbles and all the icky stuff is, because that's going to be safer for him to pass on the inside. And I point him by, still doesn't take it. I'm like, all right. Go over Phil Hill, little bitty side straight before we head into the sweeper. Again, point him by, nothing. And I'm just like, all right, like I've pointed you by on every single part of the track short of the front straight again. Mm-hmm. So the session is over. We all get out of our cars. It's time for the classroom session. So we all head upstairs to the classroom that's at Button Willow, and everyone, talks about like, hey, did we have any incidents? Did we have any offs? What are some areas where you're like, you guys want to learn more about how to go faster? Or did you have any issues with any other drivers? Things like that. Fox body guy is like, there was a guy in a silver Subaru that wouldn't let me pass. I was behind him the whole entire time, and I was getting very impatient and very frustrated. And I turn around and I'm like, so excuse me, you were behind me.
Yeah.
During that session, I pointed you by on anything resembling a straight passing zone, or a safe passing zone rather. Right. And you wouldn't take any of my point buys for an entire lap. Mind you, the two Miatas that make 98 horsepower of fury.
Yeah, somehow squeezed by, right?
Yeah, got around him and then passed me. Mm-hmm. And so we had a classroom session. It wrapped up. We get downstairs into the paddock area, and Jaime and I at Button Willow, prior to him going into Honda Challenge and everything else, we kind of like hung out in the back corner where the nice back go-kart bathrooms are. Yeah. Plus, it's out of the way in terms of just like general foot traffic and everything else. So this guy follows me to like halfway to our spot in the paddock, and basically just starts to go on a verbal rampage in terms of like, I was being a disrespectful young lady. I need to respect my elders. I need to learn better track etiquette and all this other stuff. And wow. Without getting into the details of the conversation, the short version of my conversation with him was, you have not shown me or proven to me why I should respect you as my elder. Like, you're making it a point as the elder guy to chase me down, to verbally cause a scene where everyone's turning around, scratching their head as to what's going on. And I'm standing here like, okay, if we have a disagreement, talk to me like respectful adults. It's not that hard. Like, if I made a mistake and I wasn't aware of it, it happens. Like, point it out to me, and I'm just like, oh my goodness, I'm sorry. I will never do that again. It's a learning experience for both people.
Sure.
But in this case, it's just like, I'm just like, I don't know who this guy is. I've never seen him before. This was his first event that we were on the track together.
Right.
And I think a couple of the other guys on the track, like, kind of, they talked to him going like, yo, like, we were upstairs watching and she pointed you by, like, we saw her arm clear as day.
From out here. Yeah.
And he packed up and left, like, came back.
That's awesome.
So
self-policing.
Yeah. So I got a lot of ugly stories similar to that, mainly in terms of older gentlemen who are put off by not being able to drive around, I guess, like a young lady.
We haven't had that problem. Well, I haven't had that problem at all, but Vicky and Jen and several of the ladies we drive with, we haven't seen that around here quite so much.
I think it's like I have a tendency to attract the oddballs.
Yeah.
I want to say like about 80% of the guys that I encounter are super chill. They're a lot of fun. They're easy to talk to. Like, they're all very helpful.
Right.
10% are kind of like, they like to keep to themselves. They're very cordial. They'll still say hi and have, a quick conversation, but they are just kind of like, they keep to themselves.
Oh, okay. So as a surprise, I'd like to introduce you to Greg, who drives in a Fox Body Mustang in Southern California. He just came onto the... Oh, sorry. Just kidding.
Oh, my goodness.
That would have been fun, though, wouldn't it? I have no idea.
Oh, boy. Awkward, but no, not Greg.
No idea. Just put the name. It was too much fun.
Let's see. So, yeah, like 80, 90, 5% of the guys are kind of like, they're indifferent. Like, again, they're polite, they're cordial, but they will go out of their way to, like, say hi or whatever. That's fine.
Right.
And then the last, like, 5% are the ones where it's like waking up on the wrong side of the bed, like that kind of thing, where it's just like there was already like a disturbance in the force.
Right.
And I just happen to be like a convenient target. And that's fine if the universe shakes out that way, I guess.
Yeah. Well, it's not the way things should be. And, hopefully not the way things will be. So keep working on it.
Getting better.
I know. It's sad to hear, but I guess it happens more than anybody would like, because anything more than 0 is more than I'd like. So
as far as the bad, so there's a fun story here. So this is one in terms of I want to say this is where the overconfidence and kind of like checking your ego at the door comes into play. So this is one I was running with a different organization just because I wanted the extra seat time. Again, this is in the Subaru, and I think it was 1 or 13 clockwise. I don't remember the specific configuration. The event was in January, and there was a little bit of rain happening at Buttonwillow. Not like buckets of like how rain is defined on the East Coast and like the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, I was going to say is this Southern California rain, which means like there's humidity, or is this like actually stuff that hits the ground and makes a splashy sound?
Yeah, there is stuff that hits the ground and makes a splashy sound.
Okay.
It's enough to get the track surface wet, but not to the point where like you will have to worry about like hydroplaning.
Okay. So that's probably bad for you guys, because that means all the rubber and oils are coming up, and joy.
So there was one, again, running with a different organization. The track the rain had, I think, let up just a little bit, so it was more like, I guess, like heavy sprinkles. And there was a guy in a Porsche Boxster. I want to say it was like from the early 2000s, based on like body style and like lights and stuff. He was, I want to say, like 6 or 7 car lengths ahead of me, coming out of the sweeper, going into the S's, and then his turn in for Sunset. So I was behind him, a ways. And This is one where he had been cooking out fairly consistent lap times as far as like the rain goes, from my understanding,
Mhm.
or the wet rather, not so much the rain. I guess it's the more fitting term. And he had passed me, hence the 6-car gap, which is fine because I wasn't there to like, make like a breakneck record, like that kind of thing.
You weren't going for the HPDE trophy that day?
No.
Okay.
The pint size, like I guess like bragging trophy that I would put on my Instagram.
Yeah, no.
So he gets a little hot that lap, in terms of going into his turn into Sunset and then his exit. Like it's a little messy and he's dancing around a little bit, but like nothing too scary.
Mhm.
So then we do another lap. I close the gap on him, probably closer to like 3 or 4 cars. So I'm inching my way closer to the guy. I was kind of pacing him to study him a little bit to see where I can improve.
Right.
And he goes in. So we're back at Sunset after doing another lap. And I'm just like, there, like you have like that's like that sixth sense, I guess, where you're like, I need to brake a little earlier. Like there's a weird iffy feeling. Like you get that sense as a driver.
You do. It's weird because you just something's going to happen.
Something's going to happen. You're like, I need to be like half a second more prepared than I normally am for like something. So this guy goes, he turns in a little too early and a little too hot for the road conditions, into Sunset. And I am, like 3 or 4 car lengths behind him. I brake just a wee bit earlier. So he's going, he tries to catch it. Like, I'm just like, oh, he might have it. No, he goes off the track, spins, and then it comes back onto the track surface. Like he does a 360 in the mud, then comes back onto the track surface. His headlights are facing me, and I am now exiting the same turn.
He does not subscribe to the 2 feet in principle of spinning a car, I guess.
No.
Okay.
So I'm just like, I'm trying to like, this is all happening within like within 2 seconds. Like, but
sure.
It feels like 2 hours in my mind.
Exactly.
And I'm like trying to get a read on like, where is his car going to settle? Is he going to hit the gas? Is he going to hit the brakes? Like, I'm trying to adjust. Like if I have to turn my wheel like 10 degrees, a little bit more in either direction, things like that. He finally stops, headlights straight on facing me. I make a last like millisecond adjustment, and we are so close in terms of the passing. Like I swear we could high five rear view mirrors. Like we were that close. Like my passenger side to his driver's side that was facing me.
Right.
And the guy at the flag station at the start finish line is like watching this, and he's just like holding his radio like, oh my goodness, I might have to call something crazy. And as I'm passing the start finish, he's just like giving me a giant thumbs up. He's like, and I took that as my cool down lap. I came in like,
we're good.
Like 5 or 6 minutes early. And I got out of the car and realized that I was like holding my breath.
Breathing is important on the track,
Yeah. And Jaime was like, are you okay? And I'm like, yes, I'm okay. I just needed to get off the track after that incident. That was like my 3rd or 4th year driving, so I was still pretty new.
It sounds like you were well prepped for a Lemons race, though.
Yes. In terms of the situational kind of like, oh my goodness, I have to kind of plan for this.
Yep. That's the key. It's a 360-degree awareness, and, just remembering where cars are, because sometimes you can't see them, and there's lots of them. Yeah. Very cool. Well, that was entertaining for a good, bad, and the ugly. We got more out of that than I planned on, but that's okay. We'll get some more. So you have a rather varied history on your track cars. And we were going to start talking about how your using you as an example, how your progression through the cars affected your driving and what you learned from each of these, because the cars themselves are fairly widely varied. I think is to be conservative. The only thing missing is like some big beefy mid-engine or rear engine, like 500 or 600 horsepower monster.
One day, that's still on his to-do list. I just need to get Jaime's buy-in, or I just need to buy it without him knowing.
Well, I mean, either way works for us. I mean, we'll
Right.
take care of you. We'll bring you something. We'll get you out there. Maybe HPDE day we might be able to find you one. So your history starts with
A 2004 Ford Mustang 40th anniversary edition V6 with a 3.8 liter that my parents bought for me brand new off the lot when I was 17.
wow.
It was a 4-speed automatic, and it was the worst configuration of Mustang you could possibly buy in that era. But I was super stoked because it was a brand new car.
Yep.
My parents bought it for me. I've always been a Mustang kid. Like, that was the first car I fell in love with as a child. So to have one, I asked specifically for a GT with a stick, hard top, and my parents said no. Which was probably a good thing at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So that was my first car. I kept it until I was 24, 23, somewhere in there. I don't know.
That was a while.
Yeah, I kept it for I think like 11 years. Maybe it was closer to 10. But yeah. So I had that car for a while, and then I got my first, I guess, kind of like halfway decent paying job out of college. And the Mustang was just aging badly. Ford did that generation of Fords was just not a good time. So then I went to a 2011 Mini Cooper S with a 6-speed with the flappy paddles.
Oh wow.
So that was a lot of fun. It was, well, technically it's an automatic.
I was gonna say 6-speed flappy paddles. No, because
yeah,
I had a 2009 S. And it didn't have the paddles. Okay.
That car was a lot of fun. It was so spirited. It was so playful. Like, the feedback was pretty awesome. But after about 65,000 miles, aka when the powertrain warranty conveniently, expired, the maintenance costs started going up.
Oh yeah.
In terms of not like oil changes and like normal consumables, but like the car threw $700 check engine lights each time.
Yeah. The timing chain, I remember $2,800. Yeah. With you.
So that was the first car that I took to NASA.
Oh wow. Okay.
It was a car that I met Jaime with when we first started dating.
So you passed the front wheel drive car. So okay. All right.
Yeah,
I'm beginning to see how this pieces together. Okay.
So I wanted something peppy. I wanted something small. I had watched The Italian Job one too many times, remake with
Mark Wahlberg and Charlize Theron. Yeah.
Yes. So I'm just like, what? This sounds like fun. So I did my first ever NASA event in that car. And I was super concerned in terms of like, is it going to be okay? Like, is it going to overheat? Are the tires good enough? Are the brakes good enough? Like, all the things of just like, it's going to be under a high stress environment. Like, did I, as an owner, do all these things to make sure that me and, the racing instructor, the HPD instructor, are going to be safe? Car was totally fine. I was plenty in it for my slow butt at the time.
Especially for HPD 1, right?
Yes. And where you're just like that was my first major humbling experience coming from, like aggressively driving mountain roads where Jaime was making all sorts of weird noises in my passenger seat because I was understeering everywhere. It was making him grossly uncomfortable.
It's not the most comfortable thing in the passenger seat to have a car understeer. So yeah.
Exactly. So that first event in that car, I realized how much I didn't know, and that being aggressive makes up absolutely nothing in terms of, lack of technical ability. So that's where the front wheel drive thing kicked in terms of that first exposure, having a turbo car, dealing with an automatic to a certain extent. I didn't really keep that car long enough and track it enough to really get an appreciation for the nuances of the thing. It was more of like a high level understanding of, all right, in a front wheel drive car, these are the things that I have to be aware of.
Right.
And then with an automatic in sport mode, using the paddle shifters, like, okay, like I can get away with certain things. But I was perpetually terrified of the transmission overheating. Like, that was my biggest fear. So I want to say after like the fourth or fifth $700 check engine light, I'm like, all right, we're done here. So Jaime and I started, we started ironing out a list of different cars I could possibly jump into.
Mhm.
So at the time, I really liked the functionality of hatchbacks, and being able to just, have the space to chuck in kind of whatever relative to the size of the car. I also wanted something higher horsepower, because that's the natural progression. And then, you chop off half the horsepower later in the story. And I wanted something reliable. I wanted something Japanese. I wasn't quite ready for something high horsepower rear wheel drive yet. So that's where I traded in the Mini and I got a 2014 Subaru WRX, the hatchback. So the 5-speed and then a base model, because I don't care for, like excessive bells and whistles, as long as power windows, power locks, and Bluetooth. Like that's all I really need. And so that was my first time in like 7 years driving stick again on a daily level. So it was basically relearning how to drive stick on a car with a super heavy clutch relative to what the car is.
Yeah.
And an oddly tall second gear. So learning how to rev match down from third to second took a little bit. That was an interesting learning curve. That was my first car that I poured like my heart and soul into in terms of building it, just because that was also like my childhood bucket list was I want a Subaru and I want to make it fast. So that's where Jaime's friend and the guy, my builder, John Lindemann of Corner Speed Tuning at the time, was kind of like our resident Subaru expert and guided me in a direction in terms of how to set up this car in a progressive way where you can still daily drive it, so and not commit to a full and complete like race car build. So like 80-20 essentially, 80% track, 20% for scooting around the street and getting to the track essentially. So full suspension cleanup, wheels, tires, bolt-on stage 2, specifically tuned by Paul over at Yimmy Sport to specifically go for mid corner torque in terms of getting out of the corner. That was my biggest thing. So instead of like the typical Subaru build where it's like, oh my gosh, I want E85 and I want 500 horsepower out of this fairly fragile block. I'm running pump gas. And if we can make it a little bit torquier in the mid range, like I don't care what the horsepower numbers are. I care more about my ability to get out of a corner.
Right. Less of that big wall of torque.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So when it was all said and done, I have to send you pictures of it. They're on my Instagram somewhere. The car had 303 wheel horsepower and 330 torque to the wheels, like after drivetrain loss and everything else. And
that's far from stock.
Far from stock. It's not too bad because everything was bolt on. Like I didn't do anything super crazy.
Yeah.
And then I blew up the motor at Auto Club from oil starvation and broke my heart 1,000 times over.
Wait, a Subaru motor blew up on track. Oh, my surprise face.
Yeah. So I had one of the few Subarus on the face of the earth. 0 oil leaks, absolutely 0 fluids leaking from wrong places. But basically what happened was going into the roval, even though I was at the very bottom of the bank because I knew about the oil pan issue and possibly like oil starvation, I didn't want to go high up even though the car was more than capable of doing it.
Sure.
It was still enough to starve the engine of oil for just enough to where I spun a rod bearing. And so
the sad trombone.
I did a full proper engine rebuild, replaced the clutch, replaced a couple other things, got everything machined, and brand new turbo, the whole 9 yards, stock turbo, not aftermarket stuff. Got it redone, got it retuned, and then shortly thereafter, my left hip basically decided to call it kaput. Long story super short was both my hips were I want to say like slowly degrading from an overuse injury that I had acquired from I want to say about 2 or 3 years before. Jaime and I were training for a century bike ride with a couple of our friends. So basically what happened was Overuse from the same motion without
Right.
enough, like therapy in between in terms of rest and recovery, things like that.
Mhm.
And what had basically happened was that my hip was torqued in its socket and it was sitting incorrectly by about 9 degrees.
That's not good.
And my left leg was about 3/4 of an inch shorter than my right leg. And finally it just got to the point where I think it's one of the 3 major like tendons and ligaments that connect your hip to your like the hip ball to the rest of the hip socket in terms of like that rotation. One basically was starting to atrophy, one was getting overworked, and the other one was just like, hi, like what am I doing?
I'm just here for looks. Yeah.
And so it got to the point where I could not daily drive the WRX anymore for more than 10 minutes. Otherwise, like my hip would be in so much pain.
Ick.
Jaime and I did try switching cars. So he would be driving the WRX, I would be driving his Silver Civic to see if I could kind of tolerate it. It wasn't happening.
Yeah, it was probably agitated too. So
So I put the WRX fully back to stock. I had saved everything and traded in for a 2016 or 2017. No, it was 2015 or 2016. I had a Mazda CX-5.
okay.
Lovingly named the Starbucks Cheerios. While I was going through physical therapy and trying to get my hip reacclimated and dodging surgery and everything else. So So I had the CX-5. I had made one payment on it. I refinanced it because I'm just like, I'm trying to like stretch this out as much as possible because I know this car isn't going to be a forever thing.
Yeah.
And as soon as my doctor gave me the green light of like, okay, you can start driving stick again. No traffic, no racing, no mountain roads. You are literally getting used to the motion of pushing in a clutch pedal again. And so that's when the CX-5 turned into an MX-5 that I bought over text message with my Mazda sales guy. And I had lied to Jaime. I told him that I was staying at the office late because I had a project that just needed more time to get done.
Oh, you didn't say it was a work project though.
Yeah, I said, oh yeah, I'm just like, well, I'm still at a meeting. It ran long. I need to finish up a couple other client things. And I think it was at 7:30. He was kind of like, hey, where are you at? Like, I'm waiting to have dinner with you. And I'm like, I'm leaving the office right now. And at that time we lived, I want to say about 12-ish miles from where we're currently at. And I called him when I got home, like, hey, you want to like hop in? Like, sorry for being late. Like, dinner's on me, like that kind of thing. And he got downstairs and he's just like, oh, gosh, you really did this.
It was a car. I mean, it had to be done.
Yeah, he just did. I don't know, like, if like Jaime's facial expressions where like he smiles so wide, but like rolls his eyes at the same time, but like in the politest way. He did just that. And he's like, I can't believe you did this. And I'm like, hey, doctor said I can drive stick again. No racing, no mountain roads and traffic. So I'm going to take it.
There you go.
So that's where we're at now. And then as far as the last car in the story is the EG. So Jaime brought me to the dark side of Honda and front wheel drive.
Golden age Honda.
We were discussing we were discussing our house buying plans along with our racing plans because we had both kind of hit a point where like, okay, well, we can't race our daily drivers because that's going to get a little bit expensive. And Jaime did want to compete in NASA, specifically in Honda Challenge. So it was kind of like, all right, which car do we buy? What platform? Like, what's the setup and all that stuff?
Right.
Originally, it was going to be a DC Integra.
Okay.
But then he did more research. He was very proactive about it. He's like, you know what? I think we'll have a bigger advantage until NASA changes the rules this year to get an EG because then we can run lighter. We're using less brakes in terms of, the weight of the car and all this other stuff. And I'm just like, this entire time, like, as far as like my inner child goes, like I have progressed into every single car that like at some point in my life when I was a kid, I had wanted. So like going to a Mini, going into a Subaru, going into, well, the CX-5 was a blip in the history.
we'll just walk right by that.
We'll just go past that one. And then, you know, getting a Miata, because that was always on my bucket list too when I was in high school. And then I'm like, wait, I'm going from a 2017 Miata to a 1993 what? It doesn't have ABS. Like, what is this? But for what it's worth, that car has been great. Great to learn front wheel drive on at a more aggressive level in terms of like, okay, like I can really push this car. I can hone in my craft. I can clean up all these other details that I haven't been really able to focus on. And Jaime has all the support from the Honda Challenge guys and, you know, like other Honda guys nationwide.
Sure.
So in terms of like asking questions and learning different things, understanding the nuances of like, hey, like this setup change or like this tire, things like that. Those are all things that I'm also learning on as we go too. So
So
oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, so how did the different cars help you learn as a driver yourself? Because they behave differently.
They behave differently. I think the biggest thing is being very aware of what the car is telling you. Because of how the car is engineered, how the car is set up, the feedback is very different in terms of how they tell you that they're happy versus how they tell you they're upset.
I mean, I understand what you're saying, but if somebody didn't understand, could you explain a little bit about that? Maybe some examples.
It's the easiest thing. Never mind the drivetrain, just because that's a little bit further down the line, is the weight of the car in terms of like how it's moving. Like the Mini, the wheelbase is like the size of a Pop-Tart. It's almost square to a certain extent. Pretty much, yeah. So if you go over an aggressive berm, so I use Button Willow a lot just because it's kind of like my home track in terms of the configuration, the layout and stuff. The Mini did not like being flung over bus stop going into clockwise configuration. The way that turn is set up, there's like a normal berm, but like there's still dirt in the inner curvature of the berm in terms of that turn. So depending on the car you have, if you hit that berm correctly in terms of hitting the apex, you can actually kind of like fly over it. And most cars will be fine, like stock cars. The Mini, just because less space between the front and rear tires, did not take well to that. Also, it was fairly easy to kind of like figure out which tires were getting upset in terms of they're getting heat soaked or they're carrying too much load, like that kind of thing. And since I didn't have to worry about shifting because the thing was an automatic, it's like, okay, well, I could focus more on like, you know, wheel position of the car, my own like, you know, awareness as like how I'm feeling as a driver, like that kind of thing.
Sure. One less thing to worry about.
Exactly. With the WRX, that thing was heavy.
Yeah.
After I got a corner balance with me sitting in the car with 3/4 of a tank of gas, because just to overestimate a little bit, ideally you're supposed to corner balance it at half. That's what I've been told, but I'm just like, well, we get 3/4. It was 3,400 pounds, like with me in it. It's a lot of car.
Especially between a Mini and a Miata. So, you know.
Yes, that was definitely the heaviest out of the three, excluding the CX-5.
Maybe including the CX-5 too, but
yeah, that's true. Actually, the CX-5 and probably the WRX were way the same, possibly.
They're not off by much, I would think.
Yeah, because the CX-5 is a Mazda 3 that sits higher. It's literally the same chassis.
Yep.
With the WRX, it was the thing I loved and kind of hated about the car is that depending on how you set it up in terms of like your tire suspension, if you're messing with the stock suspension geometry, coilovers, whatever, because of the all-wheel drive nature and its full-time all-wheel drive at each corner is constantly getting 25% of the available power from the drivetrain. If you mess up a corner in terms of your entry, the feedback in terms of the car telling you that it's unhappy is very direct.
Okay.
Like, the car just gets unsettled and you're like, oh, note to self, don't do that.
Yeah. Plan B next time. Yeah.
It'll either get kind of oversteering, like the rear end kind of wants to step out a little bit, similar to, I want to say, like a not like twitchier, but like a more sensitive, like rear wheel drive car.
Okay.
Whereas other times you go into a corner and it pushes really, really bad because one, that car is heavy, but two, kind of like, for the lack of a better term, like using air quotes, like there's a front wheel driveness in terms of the characteristics that kind of comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
So it makes you much more aware of like where you are in terms of your throttle position, your braking relative to the position of the steering wheel and the overall position of the car to the turn.
Mm-hmm.
That car was great about teaching me that.
Right.
Even stock, it was just like, yo, like, don't do that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you mess it up, especially with the stock tune, you come completely out of the power band. The turbo is doing nothing other than taking up space.
Yeah.
And you kind of have to, wind that car back up.
Right. And then comes the easy button.
And then with the Miata, that car is about finesse. It teaches you patience, but in a different way.
Right.
In terms of, it's not going to punish you if you make a mistake, but it's just going to let you know, like, hey, like, don't do that. The one thing that's been great about it is when you nail a turn, like, the car settled, it's happy, it does all the things that it's engineered to do, even stock, like with all of its body roll and everything else.
Right.
When you nail something with that car, it rewards you so well in terms of like, it's settled, you have the most speed going into, the next corner, things like that.
Right.
So that's where I'm just like, look, if you want, I always recommend, like, when people ask me like, oh, what car should I get for the track? I'm like, well, what is it that you want to do?
Right.
Like, are you just looking to get on the track, like, as cheap as possible? Or do you have a car that you're like, well, I'm kind of retired from being a daily, or like, I have a project car in mind, I just haven't bought it yet. Like, I do this whole Q&A with them in terms of, understanding what their goals are.
Mm-hmm.
And some people are like, I want high horsepower, I want to do all these things. And I'm like, you know what? You can get like an early 2000s Corvette. They're reasonably priced.
Yep.
So if you want high horsepower out of the box, it's pretty settled and you don't have to put too much into it other than just tires and brake pads. Like, there you go.
Yeah.
Or if they're just like, well, I'm on a budget, I kind of want to do this. I'm like, dude, NA Miata all the way, or an MV. Like, high mileage, that's someone's retired Sunday driver, like, or, going the Honda route. Like, yes,
yep.
I have Jaime who stands on his Honda pedestal all day.
Yes, he does.
But they're also very reliable, very easy cars to learn to drive and learn how to work on.
Mm-hmm.
And then, yeah, so I could go on for days.
Yep. Well, we will. Don't worry. We're just first of many. So you and I share something that is not unique in racing, but definitely makes racing both at the same time a lot more enjoyable, but also a slightly bit more complicated, in that you race with your partner.
Yes.
And I believe that this is where we get to commiserate on the pluses and minuses of this, because it's not all roses sometimes.
It's not all roses. You will get impatient with each other over really silly things.
Mm-hmm.
Pluses is that you always have a teammate
who
knows you very well.
Yes.
Not just in terms of your driving, but other aspects of your personality that go into your driving and your driving style and how you approach things.
Mm-hmm.
You also have someone by default who will always be your biggest cheerleader. Like,
sure.
They're going to be the one screaming the loudest in the stands, like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's also you're each other's coaches in terms of like, hey, like, let's watch our, video feedback together. Oh, you nailed this turn really well. Or like, we both can work on this together. In terms of like, it's a corner that we're both weak on or whatever it may be.
Right. Data is a nice one too, because especially if you're in the same car.
Yes. It's also Jaime and I have very complementary driving, I guess like characteristics or quirks. Jaime mentioned this, I think, in one of your earlier podcasts, but I'm the more sensitive driver out of the two of us in terms of like my awareness for random details. Like I could tell when a tire is 1 psi off from the other three.
Wow.
Or when one coilover is slightly misbehaving compared to the other three in terms of what I wanted to do. Whereas Jaime, because he has more seat time than I do, he has natural speed that just comes with that experience.
Right.
And once my sensitive self like picks up on those things and we make those little changes, then he's able to also incrementally get faster because the car is that much better for him.
So he just drives around it.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay.
So he's just like, oh, I didn't know like the tire pressures were off by like 2 psi in one corner. I'm like, I didn't.
How did you not know?
But he has that ability. His big thing is he worked for his dad who has a detailing shop. And so they encountered cars that were in various stages of health, so to speak. And so Jaime had to learn how to drive around the inconsistencies around different cars just to safely get them from, like his dad's shop to, the dealership or whatever. Right. So he has had to adapt on the fly. And his history of cars, like, it's like, hey, I have 4 mismatched tires or 2 tires matched on one side and the other two on the other two on the other side are completely different. Running with like, bench shock like on his TSX, like what we did when we first started dating. Cars in various states of health and repair, like he's just learned to adapt, so that's his strong suit. Right. Whereas I'm just like, these little things, they're off, and all I can do is like focus on those little things.
Yeah.
So that's where it's like, I say we're 2 halves of like one halfway decent driver.
Well, you can get there. You can combine.
As far as minuses go, we also know how to get on each other's nerves pretty fast. Either intentionally or unintentionally, just given, the nature of the situation or whatever happens. I tend to lose my patience with myself. I'm incredibly hard on myself. And Jaime's like, look, you have to take it easy. Like, just because you didn't shave off half a second on this go around doesn't mean like you're a horrible driver. It's just like, it didn't work out that time. It's fine. Right. Whereas Jaime is the world's nicest person. He stretches himself a little too thin sometimes. And I'm just like, you have to like be here. You have to be here. Like, I'm kind of like his administrator. Like, you have to do all these things. Like, you physically have to be here, or what have you. Or like getting him into the seat of his car. Like, do you have your helmet? All right, cool. You have your gloves? Cool. You have your shoes on? Cool. You stayed hydrated? All right. Like, all those little things where he's like, oh my goodness, where's my glove? And I'm like, it's literally next to you. You stuck it in the cup holder.
Yes. I think my favorite's the orange flash that he was seeing at your race, which was.
Yeah, the orange flash, which was the accent on his racing suit, which, mind you, was my former racing suit. And the little white flash that he saw on the bottom, like by the shifter. And I'm like, dude, that's the shift light that, we took out, and the light bulb was still in. And he was like, oh my goodness. So we ended up pulling out the bulb.
Shiny squirrel.
Oh my goodness. But...
Well, at least you two have the advantage where you can coach each other, because Vicky is not on that same train, shall we say. So anybody can coach her except me.
Yeah, it's just, at first I was very not receptive to Jaime's feedback. Like, once I kind of got into HPD4, I'm like, oh my goodness, like I made it this far. And there was kind of like, that's where again, like the check your ego at the door thing kind of comes in, because my ego started kind of coming back in. Right. And I'm like, no, I'm not going to take advice from my fiance, even though she's more experienced than I am. Right. And then I'm like, all right, like we need to drop this. And then I started getting faster again after like I let that wall down. Right.
It's hard. I mean, Vicky and I we started off playing volleyball, and then we were playing. Let's see, what did we learn next? Golf, and now racing. There were some other sports in there too, and it was just stuff that I had already been good at, and so I think she's worn out. She's tired of hearing me, so that's okay. I always mean the best, but we'll get there someday. It's
Little
okay.
by little.
Inch by inch, right? So we also had this topic where we were thinking about, and you mentioned it a little bit earlier. You had to deal with family perceptions on who can be a race driver and who can drive on a racetrack, and that may affect some of our listeners. Assuming we have listeners today, you never know. Could be zero. Doubt it, but hope not. But it's definitely something that I've seen, and a lot of people. The surprised look on many of our friends when we first started was like, "What do you mean you're a race driver? How your last name's not Andretti?" And I'm like, "No, it's not." But is that something that you think contributed perhaps to delaying your start in the sport?
As much as I want to blame my parents, I cannot put the whole load on their shoulders. That wouldn't be fair.
No.
But for what it's worth, my mom said that I will always love cars more than her because I learned how to say appa, which is dad in Korean, car, and then amma, which is mom in Korean. Those are my first 3 words in that order.
Could have been Calbee,
Yeah, something yummy. The whole thing is so I'm first generation Korean. So my parents immigrated here. I was born on US soil, and they had old school values that were deeply instilled in them that they have since, shaken off over the years since they were dealing with my lovely presence. Which is, I was the firstborn, which is one thing, and I was the firstborn girl, which is not typically what's expected. And then my brother, secondborn, but he's the boy. But I have the more hard-headed, I guess, like typically masculine personality as what's defined in old school Korean culture. In terms of just kind of like going for it without really like, putting too much effort into things. As a kid, I was never drawn to like Barbies or tea parties and things like that. I always had Tonka trunks and Hot Wheels. And I would use my tea party sets to like do like Monster Mash recreations with my Tonka trucks. I had asked my parents when I was 5 or 6, I'm like, I want to go karting, because I had learned about it from one of my friends. They went karting and they were like, I drove a kid-sized race car. And I'm like, Mom, Dad, I want to go learn how to kart. Like, can you buy me a kart? They said no. Girls aren't supposed to drive or race.
Not unheard of as far as
yeah. So they stuck me in ballet instead, and I resented the entire thing.
It's almost the same. It's so close. So close.
They stuck me in ballet. I resented it, and after 2 weeks, they're like, "All right, clearly this is not working."
Because the race car helmet you were wearing in ballet, was that the thing that
yeah,
threw them
like
off?
I think I had a bicycle helmet at the time, and I like drew flames on it and stuff. I was like, fuck, I'm trying to go fast. Yeah, it didn't work. No. So like I would always race like the neighborhood boys, like on my scooter and on my bicycle, like, with training wheels and everything else. Just because that was the only exposure that I had. And like as far as video games go, like the Nintendo 64, if anyone is paying attention to my age, came out when I was in 3rd or 4th grade.
Oh, well, that hurts. So, I was graduating grad school. But anyway, go ahead. The pain. I was drawn to games like Mario Kart and Diddy Kong Racing, anything related to like speed and like getting to the finish line first. That was my big thing. Not so much the first person like player games. No GoldenEye?
No, I was not part of the GoldenEye thing. Like I'm trying to actually kind of buy one now just to fill in that void of my childhood, but they're super expensive now.
They are. You just have to outlaw Odd Job and you'll be fine.
Yes. So my parents and I compromised on the whole sports thing. I got stuck in swimming. It wasn't girly. I didn't have to put on a tutu or a ballerina thing or whatever. Like I was in a bathing suit and I could swim sort of fast. I was okay. And then high school came around where it's like, all right, you start thinking about your career trajectory. And I'm like, this is a lot to be thinking about when you're 15.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I want to go to racing school because like there's still that glimmer of hope. You're still young enough to where like you can learn super quick, and you're fearless enough to understand that, to not know any better in terms of you could get potentially injured and possibly die.
Yeah. And you have time.
You have lots of time.
Yes.
And my parents said no. They were also paying for my college, like the entire shebang. Like I think I only paid for like my textbooks or something, like for 1 or 2 semesters, but they covered everything. So then I'm like, well, I want to go to school to learn how to design cars. And I was not very good at math or science. Like I was always a pretty decent artist and I was a good writer. But my parents were like, no, you're not smart enough to basically go to like, car engineering school.
Oh, I was thinking art center because you're.
Oh my goodness. Art center is amazing. They've put out some awesome graduates with some
They have.
designs.
They have.
But yeah, so went to art school. As far as my degree goes, I studied graphic design and classical painting. Thinking that I would go into the automotive industry from more the art side of things, less of the engineering and kind of industrial design side. That clearly did not work out. I graduated at the peak of the recession, so had to come up with a backup plan there. But in the meantime, like, I had my Mustang and then the Mini. I was always driving. Like
Right.
I was driving fast, but not necessarily the best.
Well,
because
you knew what you knew, right?
Yeah. So like I was always going through the canyons. I was always, like challenging people in the rear view mirrors if they were in front of me, like that kind of thing. I learned how to, do my own basic like car maintenance stuff, like oil changes, doing brakes, and more of the easier things. So I learned how to be kind of a basic wrench with the spare time that I had. And then enter Jaime. And I told my parents, hey, I'm going to, like, in Korean, there isn't a direct translation for like HPDE in terms of what that actually is.
Right.
So I use the term racing school because that was more or less kind of like the blanket term that translated fairly well. And my parents were like, what? Like, that's not a feminine thing to do. I'm like, yes, I know. You've kind of drilled this into my head. Past, like however
Yes,
many years.
We've covered this before, haven't we?
Yeah, so they came out to that first Button Willow event where I was like shaking and got, a humble pie to the face in terms of, I was grossly slow and didn't know what I was doing.
You still did it though.
Still did it. They came out, they were supportive. And their biggest fear was like, the Mini is so cute. It has a puppy face. Like, is it gonna blow up on the track? But now that like I've been doing it for a while and they've come out to the events, they've seen me race in different cars, so to speak, again, using giant air quotes because at that time it was HPD, but in terms of the environment that I was in. And they also came out to see the first few events that Jaime and I did together in the EG when I was in HPD4 and Jaime was in TT. They're like, okay, this is a legitimate thing. Like they would see my lap times, they would see me go around the track and get out, and then like they were just like, we can't tell that you're a girl when you're driving, when your helmet and your suit and your gloves are on. And I'm like, exactly,
that's kind of the point. Yeah,
that's the whole point.
Yeah.
So they've become much more, I want to say, like open to the idea. They've been more accepting of it, and they've also become more westernized in a lot of ways. In terms of more like, I want to say like American family structure and American values in terms of like, how a family operates, the differences between son and daughter, like they're not really a big thing anymore, like all that stuff.
So has your mom or dad or anybody in the family gone out with you on track or gone out with anybody on track just to see what it's like?
They're both perpetually afraid, but however, my dad thinks that he can pick up on Jaime and I's driving skills by osmosis.
Obviously.
So like he'll sit in the passenger seat of like the Miata, or like, I'll drive the RAV4 and he's riding shotgun, like that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And he'll see me like handle the car in a certain way. And then he's like, can we switch? And he'll drive. And I'm like, we're switching back.
You need work.
It's like, we are going to start with the basics. This is the gas pedal. This is the brake pedal. This is the steering wheel.
Exactly.
They operate in certain patterns that work really well and other patterns that make the car upset.
So your driving gene may not have come from your parents. Is that what we're saying?
Yeah, definitely not from my parents. We don't know where it came from in terms of like looking back at the entire Yun and Shun family lineage, going up like all four arms of the trees.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there was nothing mechanical in the family, and then you popped into the picture and we can't figure out where it came from.
But at least they get to see their daughter out there having a good time and enjoying herself.
Yeah, they're just like, hey, like we're glad you're living out your dreams and like you're doing all this fun stuff.
Sure.
And it led to some meaningful conversation. They're like, you know what, like watching you do this now, like you're like talking to my mom. She's like, your dad and I realized that, we made some mistakes in terms of how we raised you. And the things that we exposed you to. And I'm like, you know what? At the end of the day, it's not a big deal. You made the decisions at the time based on, your best judgment and what you thought was right. And I can't fault you for that.
Yeah. And it wasn't like malicious. It was just,
Yeah.
So. It was what it was. Well, it's okay. Yeah. Well, you never know. Your dad may come out there one day and just compete in the vintage racing scene and just surprise you. He may be, what he's doing. He's probably sandbagging you. He really can drive. He just hasn't showed you yet. That's what it is.
No, I'm terrified of riding shotgun with my dad. Like there have been more than enough times where he's run red lights and stop signs with me in the passenger seat.
He's just lulling you.
I'm just like, it's in the front, you're doing a very bad job or a very good job. I'm not quite sure yet.
You never know. You never know. So, Miss, we've got a little bit of time. Would you like to take a shot at some of the Fast and Furious Storytime questions?
Sure.
Okay. Well, we've done some of these through the episode already. So let's go with, what is one thing that no one knows about you that would surprise them?
I wear most of my life like on a sleeve, I guess, in terms of my Instagram. I guess one thing that people don't know is that I'm a CrossFitter.
That's right. I've been watching
I have my CrossFit level 1 trainer certification.
Look at you.
So I can
you would think
how to slowly die inside.
You would think that somebody whose fiance is a level 1 CrossFit trainer would be doing better in the Survive the 25 challenge. Just saying. But whatever. Okay. I'll be good. I think we know the answer. I think we talked about this, but just in case, there's this concept called a taproot car. It's the car that got you into cars. It could be a neighbor's car. It could be a family member's car. It could be a Hot Wheels car. What's your taproot car, Miss?
It was a 1967 bright red Mustang Fastback.
Really?
That I saw like driving in front of my preschool.
Preschool? Wow.
Yeah, I didn't know what it was at the time. I had to research it later, like actually like looking at pictures, trying to reverse engineer what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember seeing it and I'm just like, I want something like that someday. Between the red, the lines of the car and everything else, I'm like, that's fast and I want one.
Okay. So with you recently finishing your HPD ladder, you're now HPD 4 and ready to start racing. Is there anything, well, you guys live in Southern California, so this off-season thing is not applicable, but is there any area of your driving or racing that you think you need to work on?
Honestly, everything.
Raise all those.
Like, I want to work on braking a little bit later.
Mhm.
Actually, braking is a good one. So in terms of daily driving, I brake fairly late just because it's like it's a predictable environment for the most part. In terms of like, oh, there's this turn, I'm familiar with it because I drive it like every day.
Mhm.
So I've learned to brake a little bit deeper and deeper and deeper each time with the Miata. However, on the track, just because my time on the tracks are, further spread out, my
Mhm.
braking zones are about 2 or 3 car lengths longer than I would like them to be.
Okay.
So it's just braking deeper, especially with the EG, where I'm like, look, like this car doesn't have any power, doesn't have any torque. I have to momentum drive it and
Mhm.
use the brakes as little as possible.
Right.
That's one thing I would love to work on.
Okay. All right. So we are going to someday start playing the lottery. It's going to be fantastic when we win. We're going to buy an island and we're going to build a racetrack on it. What 5 cars do we have to have on the island for you to say thank you for coming on our podcast so that you will have the best time when visiting our island? 5 cars.
My goodness. Okay. I actually have a notepad so that way I can keep track of these. It's going to turn into a dozen really fast.
It's only 5.
It can be anything, like any configuration. There's like no limits or anything like
Oh,
that.
we've got a dirt track car. We've got a dirt track. We've got a nice asphalt track. We've got, you should hear some of the cars we've had over the years with this one.
I want to say, in terms of my ultimate quirky dream car,
Mm-hmm.
it would be an Austin Mini Cooper.
Really? Okay.
That has been swapped with a K24.
Wow. Okay.
Engine and transmission. It's the ultimate sleeper.
That's
Like,
what you want. You want the original Mini with a K swap. Okay.
yes.
All right.
The quirkiness of the Mini with the reliability of a Honda.
I'm sure the Mini will affect it somehow. Don't worry.
I would love to have that 67 Mustang
Okay.
that I saw as a kid.
Very nice.
As far as like, because like I also have a major love for off-road. It's not something I get to do a lot of.
Sure.
I'm trying to think like something that's kind of like somewhat off the shelf-ish, but like a full, I want to say like Baja 1000 ready, like Toyota Tacoma in terms of like the long travel, the roll cage.
You want a trophy truck?
I want a full trophy truck. I want to go over bumps at 150 miles an hour in the desert.
Okay. Okay, you got 2 more. What are you thinking?
Do I have to throw a Honda in there? I feel like I am like obligated to throw a Honda product.
You're not obligated. This is a Jaime free zone right now, so you can if you wish.
Man. I need something like unexpected, I guess. Oh, a Porsche 911 GT2.
Okay, GT2. All right.
Like straight up, like out of the box, will drive around the track for days without batting an eyelash.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think. So we got something vintage, 2 vintage things, 2 modern things. I feel like I need something that's kind of like an in between.
Okay. I mean, we've had taco trucks, so I mean, you can go. Feel free to.
I would. Okay, so this is okay. So I'll throw one Honda thing in there.
Okay.
K series.
Okay.
Is a Honda S660, the little K car, the little one.
Yeah. That'd be fantastic. I was looking at buying one of those, and Vicky laughed at me. Well, Vicky always laughs at me, so that's nothing new there. First K car. Okay, very nice. All right. So again, this does not have to be a Honda friendly zone. This is your safe place. Okay. What is your dream car that you would want to start a race car build from?
Probably NB Miata.
NB Miata. So you want a spec Miata or you want a beast Miata?
I want to say spec Miata.
Okay.
Where it's like, it's set up, it's competitive, it forces you to hone in on your driving craft just because like everyone is built, very much the same.
Yep, absolutely.
And it's reasonably priced. It's not too expensive to build one of those from the ground up.
No, not terrible. Okay. Where would your ultimate road trip be to and from, and in what car? Anywhere in the world.
Anywhere in the world? Hard. I want to go to so many different countries in the world, and COVID isn't helping.
Could be. Well, this is a post-plague road trip.
Post-plague, all of the things, and I'm unlimited money.
Of course, and time. I mean, you could go around the world. We haven't had anybody do that yet. But, we've had some people come pretty close.
I want to do something because I'm on the road, like on a paved, prepped road surface a lot. I would love to do something off-roady.
Mm-hmm.
Getting like, a vintage FJ Cruiser. So something from, like the late 80s when it was like the kind of like the bigger family car before it came back into, its two-door configuration.
Right.
So like an 80s FJ Cruiser. And if I could, obviously given geopolitics and everything else, like started kind of like in South Africa, working my way up, going through the Middle East, basically following kind of like the Asian coastline.
Okay.
Going into India, going into Thailand, going into Vietnam, following along to China. I need to somehow jump the car over North Korea into, South Korea.
It's got to be a bridge, something.
And then hop on a ferry, I guess, or something to go head to Japan.
All right. That would be kind of fun. All right. Jennifer, who wasn't able to come tonight, her favorite question is, what is your favorite car movie or car from a movie of all time?
This is going to sound cheesy.
That's fine. We've had worse. Trust me.
What was it? It was 007 from when my mom first immigrated here. What's his name? Roger Moore.
Roger Moore, yeah.
I think he had like a BMW like 5 Series or something. I can't remember. It was the first sedan that I'm just like, as a kid that I saw, and I'm like, that's a really like elegant sedan.
Okay.
In terms of just like the body lines are very timeless. They're very classic in my mind.
Okay.
And just, it's like, dude, it's like a handsome guy driving around and he kicks ass, like that kind of thing.
Yes, he does.
So I've always associated the BMW brand for the most part with that kind of like classic kind of like masculinity. If that makes sense.
No, that's fine. Usually when we hear Roger Moore, we know that a Lotus Esprit is coming out soon because it's got to go, anything that can swim, right?
Yes.
All right. So you have gone through HPDEs. You've done some racing with Jaime. You've raced in Lemons. What car would you want to switch into that you've currently raced against or racing now? And at what track? So you get to just drive that car. Take the driver out, put yourself in because you always wanted to. What car would that be? And what track?
It could be any cars that are in our lineup.
Whatever. If you've been at the track with it, you can get in it.
It's a toss up between 3, honestly, just because they have 3 very distinct personalities.
Multiple personality disorder on this podcast is a specialty. So you can have 3 of these. You have 3 of these abilities. Which ones would they be?
I would love to take the EG to Sonoma.
Okay.
I know what that track is like in a slow front wheel drive car, aka the Corolla that we had. So, and I want to drive that car or drive that track in a car with the same configuration, but that's just set up better, where I don't have to worry about babying it, but I can actually commit to setting out a couple hot laps.
Would you use the same brake pads that you used in your Corolla?
Oh no. Not by a long shot. I'd rather cut up like my workout shoes and like fashion brake pads and put them in there that way.
I was gonna say you could go get a couple 2x4s and just cut them in the right shape.
Oh my goodness. I like, if that car wasn't being stored at our friend's house that's like in the snow where none of our current road going vehicles are capable of going, I would totally just do a brake pad swap like in the middle of the night. I'm like, I cannot deal with these.
Okay, so what other 2 cars do you want to switch into? Give them a run.
I would love to bring I would also like to bring the Miata. That's Sonoma. I think that car would do really well.
Okay.
And
Somebody else's car.
I kind of want to see how Jaime's Silver Civic does at Thunderhill.
Okay. The full Thunderhill?
The same configuration that I ran. So it's the one with the bypass, not like the Hill of Doom.
Okay.
I think the way that with his car is set up, it would actually do really well at that track, relative to like, its horsepower weight ratio and things like that.
Okay. Very cool. Do you have a favorite track, and do you have a favorite turn so far?
I want to say my favorite track overall, in terms of how it pushes me as a driver and forces me to improve like every single time I go, is Willow Springs, mainly Big Willow.
Okay.
It's one where it's a commitment track in terms of like, you just have to like be ready to go. Otherwise, like, you're, especially in the cars that we drive, we meaning Jaime and I, you're going to lose a lot of speed, you lose a lot of momentum, or if something bad happens.
Yeah.
I want to say in terms of favorite turn, it's turn 4 going into turn 5. So coming down the Omega, and that last like left-hander before you go over the hill, that one's probably my favorite. Just because there's a lot of things I get to work on in that specific turn, in terms of like, it's a shorter-ish distance. So like positioning the car, like braking, getting back on the gas, like if I want to downshift or if I need upshift, or depending on whatever the situation is. But there's a lot of little things that happen in that turn that I can practice kind of all at the same time.
Okay. And the follow-up to that one is there a turn that you just can't get right ever? Like, it is your nemesis?
There's a lot of those. Because it's a seat time thing.
All of them.
I want to say, in terms of the one that sticks out the most in my mind, is, I want to say Cotton Corners, but the first turn is a throwaway, just given how that the turn layout. I slow down way too much. It's Cotton Corners over at Willow Springs, specifically running in any clockwise direction.
Okay.
I bleed off way too much speed going into those, even though I know the car is fine. It's just psychologically, it's like, oh, it's one right after the other. Like,
and then you pay for it forever. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I use the entire back section of the track trying to wind the car back up. So.
It's like, yeah, that understood. Okay, all right. So, what is something about your driving or racing that you are relatively good at, relative to what you would consider your peers? What do you think you're good at? And you have to answer.
I want to say,
you don't have to be like a superstar. You just have to be, relative to your skill. This is one of the things I'm better at.
I want to say situational awareness, in terms of knowing where each car around me is, especially if they're behind me, because I'm driving the slowest vehicle. So it's like, hey, this car, like looking back in the rear view, going like, okay, this car I know and this driver are faster than me because they have 5,000 horsepower. They're
right.
4 corners behind. I have time to mentally prepare to, like, let them pass, like that kind of thing.
Okay.
And just overall spatial awareness, in terms of knowing where everything is at any given time.
Right.
And, letting people know that I see them.
Very cool. That's the perfect thing to have for a Lemons race, because you've got a lot of cars.
There's a lot going on.
Yeah. And what do you think you could use a little bit of work on?
I want to say just like overall confidence, if that makes sense.
It does with some of your answers before. So I would say, yes, that would be good.
So that's where it's like I know I'm good at certain things. I know my skills are, decent. It's just more of like that, having enough confidence to go like, I can pass somebody, just because I'm used to being passed all the time.
Hey,
either
understand.
in a learning environment, or because, like, again, I have the slowest car, aka the EG. So just go like, I can't commit to passing this person because I know I'm faster than them. So that was actually one of the great things that came out of the Lemons race was like, okay, for a long shot, I have the slowest car, more or less mechanically speaking, but it was also mechanically sound for the most part. Whereas there were other cars on the track where it's like, all right, like I know it's fast, but like what's going on?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, I've been studying this guy. I'm faster than him coming in and out of the corners. Like I'm just gonna get him. So
That's one thing about endurance racing. You get to pass a lot of cars.
You get to pass a lot of cars, and it's kind of like, oh, and you going for a fuel stop. It's like, oh, right, well, they passed me for the 2 laps that I had on them or whatever.
It's okay. That's all right. There's always a few cars where you're about the same. So you find each other. So, my dear, you've made it through the podcast. This is your first of many. Hopefully, we'll get you on out here after you come out and visit us for your East Coast race, and you learn what it's like to like drive to a track and perhaps even drive when it's this thing called rain. This foreign concept for you people down there. But if people wanted to follow along with you and see what's going on with your racing, or just see what's going on with you, is there a better way for them to follow?
Yes. So you can follow me on Instagram. That's the easiest way. My handle is Miss Awesomer. It's MSAWSMR, all in lowercase. I do have my profile set to private because I have one ex that's kind of psycho. So don't be intimidated by the private profile, folks. Just let me know. I'll make sure to, add you guys.
Yep.
Jaime's podcast, Race FF, he mentions me every once in a while in terms of our shenanigans and things that we get into.
He does.
So there's that. Our friend Kelvin Areola has a YouTube channel, Drift Monster, literally spelled Drift Monster, all one word. He has a great series on the Lemons build.
It was fantastic.
Well as the Lemons race itself. So you'll get to see some of our antics there.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yes, you will. And I don't think everybody at the race got your theme, but they all respected your theme once they just were told what it was. That's okay.
That's fine. That's good. It's also I think most of the crowd at Lemons are about, I want to say, like at least half a generation older than Jaime and I are.
Yeah.
So like that cartoon series, Initial D, was very prominent when, I want to say, like when he and I were kids.
Mm-hmm.
But for most people, it's like you guys would have been, I want to say, like in your 30s at least.
Yeah.
In terms of when that series came to the US.
Yeah. Well, that's okay. Well, it doesn't mean it's not good. Just means we weren't familiar with it at the time.
That's a different age gap. It's fine.
That's a good thing. Well, I do appreciate you coming on. I do appreciate you having the tolerance of our stupid and inane questions and putting up with it for as long as you did. And we look forward to meeting you in the real world.
Yes.
Catching up.
We need to pick a track. We need to pick a time.
Yep.
Oh, here's an idea. Doing a couples episode.
We could do that. We could definitely do that.
That would be fun.
That's right. That would be great. You know what the best part would be? If we did like a male team and a female team, and the female team wins. That would be fantastic.
Oh my goodness. Well, I think by default, Vicky and I have like, a power to weight advantage on you guys.
That's okay. That's fine. It's okay. We should be good.
It's like, hey, Jaime, let's use that CrossFit L1. Come on, let's go. Let's make it more competitive.
That's right. Well, Jaime's got to get off the slide and start cooking on this Survive the 25, because right now he's on Survive the 1.
Oh boy. Yeah.
And you can't blame the donut that Mental gave him for everything. There's something else going on here.
Yeah, no, it's been a series of little dietary decisions where it's like, oh, I'm gonna have a burger, and then 2 days later, oh, I'm gonna get something else. And it's like, all right, we got to work on consistency here.
Well, the starting this right before Thanksgiving was probably not the best plan that we've ever come up with, but that's okay. It's still fun. We're having a good time. Well, thank you, Miss. We will definitely have to talk to you some more, and we will make some plans, and hopefully Miss Vicky and Miss Jen will be able to come on, and who knows, we might even see Alan. We haven't seen him in a while.
Yes.
But
that'd be a lot of fun.
Yes, which would be fun. And we until we talk again, or hopefully until we race again, which would be so much more fun. Thank you for coming on. Have a great night.
Thank you for having me.